Our world continues to change and push us in ways we have not been challenged before. On this show, we talk about these challenges, how to be aware of them, face them, and overcome them in your life. This is David Waldas, creator of the Aligned Living System.
And I'm Nick Musica, Aligned Living Coach. Welcome to the Aligned Living System podcast.
So do you think we're born with a purpose, or is that part true and part we co-create what we desire?
Yeah, absolutely. And so, I mean, this brings up the conversation that's come in quite a few times in the podcast too, around primary gifts versus secondary gifts, right? And so primary gifts are the things that, to me, it's what we're here for. It's like there's a sole purpose connected to it. And the challenge with them is, I think we do come in with them, and the people around us usually aren't like, awesome, I really like these primary gifts of yours. They're usually some sort of disruption. Like I often talk about mine, of like being able to see clearly what's happening and to see where people are coming from and actually see the truth in something, because we live in a world where so many people are just trying so hard to maintain their illusions, to go, yeah, I'm trying really hard not to look at that because I don't think I'll be okay if I do. And so I'm just pretending this is true instead. And then this damn kid comes along and goes, hey, look at that thing you're not looking at, right? Like, people don't go like, oh, great, David, more of your primary gifts, as a 5-year-old or whatever, that's, just being able to disrupt people's homeostasis. And so to me, I was in trouble a lot for that. And so when we look at whatever our individual gifts are, they often have a countercultural component to them, a disruptive component to them, something that doesn't make the people around us go like, oh yeah, keep doing that, do more of it. And I think that's changing. I think that more and more kids are being born into situations where their greatest gifts are being supported and brought out in them. But for most of us that have been here for a while, that's not the case. And so what we do is we develop secondary gifts, which are the things that we're good at that make other people happy, that make other people go, oh, good job, do more of that. And so we enjoy doing it. And a lot of what we enjoy, maybe we start to enjoy the task or the way of being, but so much of it's the feedback. Like, I'm being a good boy, or I'm being a good girl. People love and appreciate me when I do this. There's great payoff for this. And it creates this trap that draws us into offering things that we've developed, high competencies at, but they don't bring that deep level of fulfillment. They're not sole purpose stuff. And they often disguise as our life purpose. It's, I think I'm here to do this. But when we start to awaken really why we're here and what really wants to come out of us, as scary as that can be and as rewarding as that can be, that's where that deep level of fulfillment, that sense of being on purpose, that sense of meaning in life just becomes really present. And then often the secondary gifts we developed can support us in bringing them out, but we need to readjust and realize, like, what is it that I'm really doing here? Why am I doing it? And, people are often afraid, like, oh, does that mean I'm gonna have to leave my job and doing this? Well, maybe not. Maybe you're actually going to keep doing it, but you're not doing your job anymore. You're doing something else through that job. You're offering, some sort of support, because our greatest gifts are always about something that helps others, people transform as well, or supports them to find a part of themselves. And so they're very different in nature. And it's interesting too, because something else is just popping in here, which, is kind of a shadow side to this, is that there are some people here that, and again, they're probably not listening to this podcast, but the reason that this is coming up is to help understand, other people's dark behavior. Because I think there are some people here, that have experienced whatever trauma, or, a lot of their life purpose is about playing the role of the disruptor, playing the role of somebody who's creating negative things that supports other people's growth, not supports it like, thank you, but creates a circumstance and opportunity where other people work through it. And so, part of my belief system says that, our soul comes here into this planet with this life purpose, doing these things. At some point it leaves, it goes back over, kind of goes to that school on the other side, learns what it learns, and then it takes on another assignment to bring a primary purpose to whatever it is and work with other souls that are here doing the same thing. And so there are people here who, have taken on an extremely challenging job of actually bringing what would be perceived at the third dimensional level as negativity or hurt or damage into this world that creates the perfect circumstances for other people to grow. You know, just like we said, it's not like, well, why would a kid want to struggle financially growing up or feel like they don't have support? What good is that when they could just have the support? Like each thing has its own gift and its own challenge. And so, you know, it's really important when we look at, you know, like, I mean, people like Hitler or, you know, whatever, like, God, like, imagine the soul job that person took on, you know, to come in and cause that much destruction and hate and anger. You know, in a way, it's a sole purpose, and I don't want to get too far down that, but I don't want people to get distracted from like, well, if we all have a sole purpose, why do people act that way? Well, that's what they're here playing out. And so when we look at ours, like we don't need to be distracted by other people's sole purposes or to think that can't be true because we're watching people behave in negative ways. You know, it is just all part of what this kind of proving ground is, development ground here is on Earth. Does that make sense? I know that I never like to go too into the dark, but it's such an important component of it because I think people's thinking can get stuck. And when we can kind of explore it enough to just not get stuck there, I think it has great value.
Yes, I have to bring up, David, the book you recommended for me to read, which is Radical Forgiveness. And in that book, it, you
It's by
can
Colin Tipping,
describe
by
it
the way,
better,
too.
but the mirroring the purpose of who you choose even as a partner or mate, which this will tie into the next subject I'll go into. But for now, as we're talking about even our purpose and parent-children relationship and these disruptor roles in life, please share your thoughts on the radical forgiveness and how other souls interact with us and how that's part of our Earth school in this lifetime.
Yeah, absolutely. And you know, the basic premise of this says that we call in the perfect souls, you know, that there's often prearrangement, you know, we kind of already know each other before we come here to teach each other certain things. And when we need to be treated a certain way, like for a healing to happen or for an opening to happen, because it can happen in both directions. Like it can be like this perfect person shows up and gives us the support and the love we need for us to work through how we haven't felt that. And, you know, and there's some shadow side we need to release and something we need to open up to and transform. But there's also people that show up in our lives that, you know, bring negativity, that push us into something that we need to heal or something that our soul has decided it's going to go through on this, you know, in this journey on this planet this time. And the perfection of all of that there's these souls dancing together and that none of it's personal. In fact, so much of it is like these agreements, these soul contracts we've made with each other. And you know, I think that one of the strongest evidences of this that we can see in a 3D world is if you haven't experienced it yourself, I'm sure you know somebody else who's experienced it, is somebody that has some sort of relationship. We often see it in romantic relationships where the person, you know, behaves one way in the relationship and you want them to, you know, make that shift and they don't make it, the relationship falls apart and then they go on to the next relationship and become everything you'd hope they would be in this relationship, right? Like, like how
I have
is
no
it
idea what you're talking about. Ha ha ha.
how is it that in this relationship you can't be that like with us, but you can go there and be exactly what it is I was seeing in you that I wanted you to grow into in that relationship? And it feels personal. It feels like betrayal. It feels like, oh, I wasn't important enough. But again, there's these soul contract components of it, of what is it that you're trying to teach each other? What is it that you've agreed to teach each other that doesn't necessarily develop inside that, but then can develop moving on? Maybe you've seen that with friendships. Maybe you've seen that with like, they were never supportive of me. And now here they are being completely supportive of that other person. Maybe you see it in relationship with a parent. Like my father can never be supportive of me, yet here he is with his friend's kid being this loving, supportive person. We see it a lot with grandparents, right? Like, you know, how often does a kid go, my parents couldn't be that for me, but they sure as hell can be it for my kid, you know, and then they have to sort through. And so these, you know, the grandparent piece, you know, has a lot to do with development, but there is this piece that says, what are the dynamics that we're here to create together to learn and grow? And sometimes they can resolve and move on and happen, you know, particularly when we're aware of the radical forgiveness. And there's these incredible worksheets that come with that help us sort through it and break up the energy, because it's about really achieving what needs to be learned. And when both parties can achieve what needs to be learned and complete that soul contract, it can grow and become something different, sometimes together, sometimes apart, but it completes its purpose. It resolves. And so, to me, that's so fascinating. And of course, as humans, when we're in that human perspective, it all feels so personal. Like, really, you all of a sudden now are like that person that I was trying to get you to be like, I want you to be adventurous. I want you to travel with me, and you wouldn't leave the house. And now here you are, like posting on Facebook about your trip in Europe, and then now you're in Australia. Like, you wouldn't leave the neighborhood. And that, like it's so funny how those ways that we lock in with each other, and they're not personal whatsoever. They're much deeper than that. They're soul contract.
Yes, and so this is going to tie in to the juicy part. This may be part 2, David, of
All
our,
right. All right.
our
All right.
podcast, is relationships, and
Mhm.
in first part, romantic relationships in particular.
Sure.
As I have been on a quest for an extraordinary relationship in my life, which I
Mhm.
have with, my husband, Tom, and
Absolutely.
our work together and improving that. And a lot of what you're saying, it has been some mirror episodes or learning through challenging situations and how to navigate that. And so I recently did a workshop, and it talked about 3 components for feminine versus masculine. And I thought
Mhm.
this was
Mhm.
fascinating.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so for the feminine, it says there's 3 U's, okay, that the woman wants to feel that she needs in her romantic relationship. The
Yeah.
first
And
is
this is Donnie
feeling.
Epstein's work, right?
This is Tony Robbins,
Oh,
actually.
okay.
I'll
Oh,
give
okay.
credit to
Cool.
Tony Robbins.
Sure. Sure.
And I just want your thought. I'm going to tell you the 3 U's. We can
Mhm.
just start with the feminine first, and then we can go to the masculine side if that's okay.
Sure. Sure.
So, and what shuts down intimacy, okay? Feeling unseen,
Mhm.
feeling not understood, and
Mhm.
feeling unsafe.
Mhm. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
as a woman, I can completely relate to that. And I'm sure each person
Mhm.
has different. If you wanted to order at 1, 2, 3, what do you need most? Do you need to feel safe? Do you need to
Mhm.
feel seen? Do you need to feel understood?
Yes.
Um, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. Yeah. I think that it's important for that not to be looked at in isolation. And I think that it's absolutely true. And when we get too zoomed in on, too focused on, this is what I need. And so we're talking about how fertile is the environment for me to grow versus it not being fertile. And so when those components are present, and we look at it from this personal responsibility place, we're like, you know what, this is what I require from a partner because I need a fertile environment for me to grow. And then in that, I get to really choose, and I feel more empowered to choose what I want to move forward, to develop the parts of me, because the container that I'm in really enforces that and stabilizes that. And so I think that, and I'm not sure how Tony talks about it, but the idea of really bringing these 2 components together that says, my job is to develop myself, to get in touch with where my fulfillment is, to express that. And my job is also to choose the containers that I'm going to live in. And so when I look at it from that personal perspective, moving out, now we start to go, well, what is it that I need in a partner? And what is it that I'm okay with? What is it that I'm not okay with? How do I elicit that in them? And, and how do I communicate that? And how do I invite in that openness and create that dance now? And, like I always want people to originate from their own internal solid space of how am I showing up? And I think what you're bringing is just a huge component of it, because so many people do the opposite of that. They're right, like meaning that they start with this piece of how am I showing up, but they don't recognize the value of the container that they're allowing around them, or they're calling in, or that is the deal breaker of, I'm not going to accept not that. It has to be this. Does that make sense, or how does
Yes.
that land?
Yes. One thing that struck me was I believe this is what Tony said. 95% of your success in a relationship is mate selection. And so for me, and I'm open to what you think of this, having a partner that's willing, whether you have core values or a level of commitment that matches, like we're going to work through stuff when it comes up, loyalty, or whatever that looks like for you. I think in choosing a partner, you have to have some alignment there before you can even have the environment that you're saying, is this ripe to feel safe? Is this ripe to open up and say, these are my darkest fears, and how can you help me through this situation?
Yeah, yeah, and it's interesting too. I mean, I'm single now for the first time in really 28 years, where I was married for 25 years, and obviously there was the dating leading up to that, and so it is interesting. Like my container, I've taken time and really in the last year plus been just in my own space a lot, right? And so it's interesting as you're talking about this, because I've been responsible for the container I'm creating around me. And the idea of enhancing that with a partner is very interesting, right? And so taking out all that time and really kind of slowing my life down, my personal life down in that way, it had a huge value to me in sorting through what I've allowed, what I haven't allowed, what I've been drawn to, what I haven't been drawn to, and working on sorting through the importance of that for me. And as I get to a place where when I'm ready to open up to relationship, what that needs to look like, what that support needs to look like. And so it's kind of a fun question that you're asking, because there's the human part of me that's been on this journey for the last year, and there's also the guidance that comes through with that, and the guidance I've been continuing to get as I've checked in with myself, as I've been through my own personal development in this arena, and so that whole piece around we it is a sorting process, right? Like we call in these experiences that reflect to us where we're at. And so much growth happens in relationships when we let it. So often people look for stability through the other person, or ways to not be responsible for self, or ways to shut down, same kind of thing. When we move right into this loving environment and we haven't stabilized ourselves, it can be very easy to hand ourselves over to that person because we trust them so much. But what does it look like when we've stabilized inside of ourselves and we feel that strength and it's of value to us? It's not something we want to give away. And then we bring that into a supportive environment. Like those two components that work together are absolutely huge. And if we haven't developed that, when we move into a non-supportive environment, it can kind of match it and it can just get kind of congested and move along and struggle. But what happens when we have developed that, like, and we try to move into a non-supportive environment, like we just can't do it. Like even if we create illusions around it, because there are some other good things. And I would say that this is probably the primary challenge people have in intimate relationships, is that they get enough of the things that they really have desired in it that show up, that they ignore the deal breakers. They ignore the things that they're just not okay with because the good things are there. And the universe does that for us, right? They offer us and go like, oh, this looks really perfect, except for these couple things, but don't worry about that right now, because you're getting these things you're really hungry for. And, and so I think that can be, when we are looking for something inside of us to be alleviated, some sort of lack of trust that we may have in ourselves, or something that we don't feel like we've been able to generate or create that we feel like needs to come out from outside of us, it sets us up for that. And that can be sorted through in the relationship. It doesn't mean the relationship can't work, but generally what happens then is in that relationship, the work that is about whatever it is that we haven't wanted to really be in full responsibility for, that starts to, if it's completely taken care of in that relationship, there's a honeymoon period where that feels great. And then at a certain point, it becomes congestion and it becomes an opportunity for working through our own power, if we choose it, or we could just kind of, settle into it and stop our personal development. But when we stay on a personal development path, those things need to be sorted out. And of course, they can be sorted out inside the relationship and renegotiated about, who's going to bring what to the relationship, and, and how that's going to look. Yet ultimately, that that piece of, what is it that we're needing in a relationship, when it's based on things that we haven't been able to reconcile inside of ourselves, and then we feel like somebody else is providing that for us, so we don't have to reconcile it. When we stay on a path of personal development, it's going to come up, and it's going to be the work we'll have to do in the relationship anyways. And if it's this great container, it makes it easier to do that for sure. But part of that is just those illusions popping, and again, same thing, like, oh, look at your, like for a kid whose parents say, you're taken care of financially. Like at first there's this huge relief, and at a certain point when they try to grow, they feel the limitations of it. Yeah.
Wow, this is one of my favorite topics. And I have so many more questions. And I think something you said about continuing to grow through those situations, and obviously this is depending on whether you're in a well-matched relationship to do that or not, as you mentioned,
Sure.
is the grass is not always greener syndrome, or people thinking like, oh, the grass is greener, I'll just leave this relationship, and then they go to the next and they repeat the same patterns, or they attract someone similar
Or the
that
opposite.
seems enticing. Yes.
Yeah.
And you're still working through your stuff.
Yeah. And and I think the other degree to that too is something we, I just hit on, where we all of a sudden see ourselves or our ex operating in a completely different way than they were able to in that relationship, right? And so sometimes when we're ready, we call in a new relationship that actually allows for that space for whatever reason. Like we've done the healing work, it couldn't happen inside that container. The container needed to change. There's a new container, and all of a sudden there's this opportunity to flourish because the environment is rich and supports us in that specific area where we were trying to grow. And so, yeah, absolutely. We look at how often do people choose rebound relationships. When they get out of a relationship, they go, you know what, this person didn't provide this for me, this, or this, and that person does, and then they feel great. There's a honeymoon period, right? And then they go like, well, shit, they're also missing all these great qualities that my ex had. And then we start to reveal to us, if we're really honest with ourselves, of what we took for granted in that relationship, because of course we did. It's part of it's just part of our life. Like, well, I didn't really think about like the value that brought. I was so focused on the things that weren't there, or the ways I felt restricted. And so, my hope is for people that are going through that, and it's been part of my journey too, is to find the appreciation for what was there, the understanding for what wasn't, how we've created that. And then also getting really clear on, what is the container that I need? What were the incredible qualities about that existing relationship that I absolutely do continue to want in my life? And, what else do I need now? And, it's so easy for us to, when we get focused on our pain points or our victimhood, or where we didn't feel supported or where we felt restricted, that becomes often all we're looking for in the next relationship, as opposed to recognizing all the beautiful things. You were in that relationship, it wasn't all bad. There was things that were really beautiful for you. And so, we often forget that and take it for granted, and then don't really hold a desire for that in the next relationship because it was taken for granted. We didn't value it.
What would be your best advice to someone who's really determined or focused on a relationship at, say the place that you're in right now, where you have freedom to decide who enters your life,
Yeah.
and you can sit down and write, these are the characteristics or the qualities, or this is what I want my relationship to look like. Do you have any advice on that? And also like these are the deal breakers, to be aware of that as well.
Yeah. It's funny. I think one of the things we can recognize very clearly is, this is funny, is the things that we are naturally attracted to that are about old trauma and are not good for us. And so, like, particularly with empaths, like so many of us are helpers, right? And so when one of our primary ways of being is, how can I support this person? Like we can kind of come up with a list of what are the things that I really like, but what are my red flags? What do I have to watch for in myself that I have a tendency to get drawn into? And so it's like, if I just want to help somebody, am I getting drawn into situations where I feel really needed and supportive and I'm actually getting to play this role that I absolutely love to play. And maybe we do that for work, right? But so often people also create that at home, like a nurse that, loves to nurture. And then they have a husband at home that, needs to be taken care of versus the stability. And we tend to not make different rules for what we want in our home base and that stability and how we're going to support each other than we do how we're going to offer our gifts out in the world with our work. And I think that is a really key component too, because where the people that we were supporting, need that support, but what do we need? And, people often just think about their greatest offerings and create relationships connected with those greatest offerings instead of relationships connected with the support and the stability that is usually feels very, very different than the gifts that are offering in the world. Because our inner circle, where absolutely, of course, we're going to offer those gifts, it shouldn't be the primary thing. It shouldn't be what is most required of us and most needed by our partners, even our close friends, our close circle. It's almost like, makes me think about the idea of colleagues, right? When how important it is to have colleagues in your work that you can talk to about what it is you're going through, offering whatever it is you're offering. And then there's a deeper understanding, there's operating in a different container. And, when our relationships are a different container than what we're offering to the world, often we don't think about valuing that because we're still just thinking about how good it feels to operate in our greatest gifts in the ways that we like to, rather than what is the home base, what is this inner world that I can create with somebody that actually supports me to bring that and is rejuvenating and doesn't require those same things of me, but creates this incredible balanced, supportive environment.
So that is going to bring me back to the masculine, feminine, and I touched on the feminine qualities of wanting to feel seen, understood, and safe. And I think what repels men in a relationship are the 3 C's, and that's feeling controlled, feeling criticized, and when a woman closes off or shuts down.
Yeah.
And I think it's important what you touched on to, let's say you have a high-powered female CEO that is probably more masculine in her career role, and then comes home to a husband and still tries to control or make all the decisions in the relationship, that might shut him down.
Yeah, they don't change their dynamics when they get home, right?
Right.
Yeah, and I think too, like, do I see this person as an equal? And when we have a strong, powerful way of leading, we're usually leading people that we feel like need us to lead them. And if we take that into a relationship and we're not with somebody that we respect, their ability to have their own power and their own strength, and that now we're 2 colleagues standing side by side, looking at each other and going, wow, that was a really important point. I value what you're saying, and it's making me look at this differently. And when I share something, you value what I'm saying, and it makes you look at it differently. And then maybe we discuss and come up with a third perspective that actually incorporates, both of what we're bringing. But that kind of balanced mutual respect, in order for us to have these higher level relationships, I think is absolutely important. Most relationships aren't like that. And most relationships have like, oh, this is where, and I think this is still an important part of it. Like, this is where your strengths are. And I appreciate that because I know it's not one of my greatest strengths, and we can utilize that. And here's my greatest strengths. And and you appreciate that, and you utilize that, and you let me lead here and I let you lead there. I think that's super healthy. And I think that majority of relationships just kind of get stuck, and it's not about appreciation. It's about like, you always take this on, I always take that on. We're just in our roles, and there's not an appreciation for what each person's bringing, a valuing of it. Where are the places we can help enhance each other? Like, that perspective often just gets washed away in the, this is funny. This is what the guys just said, in the art of survival. It's funny for them to call it art, because you think of art as like creative and flow, but it's it's funny that term would come through, the art of survival, because we get creative in our survival and we find areas to shut down, we find areas to give away our power, we find areas to usurp power, and that does have its own creative component of it, even though it's often very unconscious. And so when we can bring that consciousness to, really recognizing we're in an area where we may not be as strong, but our partner has these incredible gifts, and supporting that, and being able, like, what do I need to, if this is the gift, this area in our relationship where you're going to take this on, how can I support you to do that? What's the container I can hold for you to do that part? And then vice versa. But really that balancing of knowing where our gifts are, knowing where we can enhance each other, knowing where we can work together, where we both have gifts that we can bring that out. But it being this very creative, safe, trusting and endeavor and relationship and connection that helps both parties grow, or multiple parties grow, depending on the type of relationship we're talking about. Whether it's a friendship or a working relationship, or whether it's an intimate relationship. But we often end up in default. I love that, the art of survival. And that's, very much an unconscious thing where we get very creative to, create power struggles.
That is beautifully said, well said, on co-creating and valuing one another in a relationship.
Thanks for listening to part 2 of this 3-part series, and join us next week as Jeanine and I dive deeper into intimate relationships. See you next week. We hope you enjoyed listening to today's podcast, and if you did, please subscribe so you can catch the next episode. If you want to learn more about the Aligned Living System and how it could support you in your life, check out davidwaldas.com.